Welcome back to the Politics with Paul podcast. I am your host, Paul Rader. Today we're going to talk about knowledge gaps in politics again. Last week we talked about some of the ways that politicians, interest groups, and other political professionals try to exploit knowledge gaps in voters. And here a knowledge gap refers to aspects about politics that we have some sort of hole or shortcoming in what we know about politics, such as candidate views, the nuances of policy issues, or what other citizens believe, for example. And every single one of us has a knowledge gap about politics somewhere, including those of us most involved in it. There's just too much to pay attention to. Unfortunately, though, there are a lot of attempts, many of which are successful, to use what voters don't know against them. There's a lot of preying upon biases and shortcomings that all of us have to some extent when it comes to political knowledge. Specifically, in the last episode, we talked about the concerning power of our biases, the rise of artificial intelligence, the fragmentation of mass media, and the competing for consumers' attention, the complexities of the political process, and the inability or lack of time to research information, how all of those are used to exploit knowledge gaps amongst the public. But I don't want to just leave it on how we get taken advantage of with no solutions given. So today we're talking about some tips for counteracting political professionals' attempts to manipulate us. Now, these are all obviously much easier said than done, and this isn't an exhaustive list because also all these kinds of tips to just go on and on and on and on for all week. But the aim is to give advice that is much easier for us all to act upon. That doesn't take a whole lot of effort to do, or at least relatively less effort. And to give you some encouragement that we can indeed fight back against these attempts made to exploit our knowledge gaps. So, real quick, just to recap last week and the ways that exploiters try to take advantage of us, and just to go over the definition of exploiter here, not singling any person or group out, but these are people that try to use knowledge gaps in the public about something like how the political process works or candidate views. And all of us have these gaps to some extent for some sort of political gain. And these exploiters tend to be very polarized and or one-sided. You don't have to be polarized in terms of partisanship or ideology or issue beliefs to be one-sided, though. And they tend to think that their worldview explains everything. But I focused on 5 aspects that these exploiters use to try to manipulate us. There's the concerning power of our biases. This is really the driving force for how people try to manipulate us. The rise of artificial intelligence and how it's getting better and better and better at trying to fool us. The fragmentation of mass media and how they're all trying to compete for consumers' attention, because for all of the issues that mass media has, the market and media consumption habits also incentivize a lot of this behavior. The complexities of the political process, a lot of times exploiters trying to make things sound much simpler than they actually are, but the political process has a lot of complexity to it. And then the inability or lack of time to research info. So people might just not know how to research things. Or even if they do know how to research, there's only so much time, or they don't necessarily have all the tools that they could have to make things easier for them. So that's just a quick recap. But now to actually get into real tips as to how to protect against these attempts to exploit our knowledge gaps. First of all, probably the most important thing is to re-examine our biases. Everybody's got them, even if they don't want to admit it. Some people do really think that they're not biased. That's false. You are biased. We all have these uh, sort of tunnel vision about what we believe. It's a natural part of human nature. It's not an inherently bad thing to have biases because we all have certain things that we're predisposed to. It doesn't have to be even politics related, just the kinds of tastes that we have in terms of food and hobbies. Technically, those are a type of bias. when those biases become a bad thing is when they start affecting how we interact with other people in a negative manner, or it paints what is supposed to be an unbiased picture of something as basically passing off opinions that people have about groups of people or individuals or ideologies or whatever the case may be, trying to paint that as objective fact when it's really just an opinion. The trick comes with recognizing when our bias comes out. Happens even when we don't realize it. You really have to be on your toes. Sometimes you use certain language that other people find to be biased one way or another. Uh, but some of the tips for re-examining our biases is think about how what you say will come across to somebody else. Not even just politics. Think about times you've interacted with a friend, family member, or just a random person, and you said something that was taken completely the wrong way. Happens to all of us. Every one of us has done that. And then, especially if you apply it to politics, where you might not necessarily be trying to be abrasive about something that you believe, but you happen to be, or you talk about something as some sort of political fact. Don't let your politics become intrinsic to your identity. To some extent, what you believe is going to be a core part of who you are. But it's when people, when their party affiliation or their ideology or what they believe about issues becomes the driving force of their personality. Like if I was to go up to somebody and say, I'm Paul Rader and I think abortion should be legal everywhere, or I don't think abortion should be legal. Should that necessarily be the thing I lead off with? No. Now, inevitably, that's going to be part of somebody's belief systems and therefore part of their identity, sure. But when it's just completely driving who you are, and I'm not talking about abortion specifically, that was just an example. But better yet, maybe I say, and I'm a Republican, or and I'm a Democrat, or I'm an independent. That becomes the thing. If I'm leading off with that, you're going to put people off. Doesn't mean you can't say that you're one of these things or what you believe in, but you can't. When it becomes a part of your identity, you also tend to assume things that are the opposite, a different opinion, start to treat those things as existential threats. So you really have to be careful. And I'm actually going to highlight something at the end of this, an interesting article I just saw actually today of this recording, um, talking about how people used to not really lead off with that, what their partisan affiliation is, but now it's become like the first or second thing that people use to identify themselves as. But we'll get to that towards the end. But when you seek out info, are you simply looking for information that confirms your point of view? Everybody's susceptible to confirmation bias. We find things that we agree with. We don't really try to evaluate it further. We say, see, my opinion's correct. And then when we find something that we don't agree with, we either ignore it or we just think it's a bunch of crap. But you can't, but that's your bias talking. We all have our shortcomings in our point of view. Nobody's worldview explains everything. You have to realize how your point of view is already coloring everything. And so you have to really take a step back and think about, well, is this necessarily accurate, or is there a different point of view that can be stated here? Speaking of which, making efforts to understand differing points of view. You really got to try to get at why someone thinks the way they do. And a lot of people think they do that, but they really don't. You have to think about what life experiences they've had that have led them to that point of view. The kinds of people they hang around with, their family upbringing, their religious and social influences, all these kinds of things that they've had. Don't just assume that they're being misguided or ignorant. Now, maybe they are, but you can't just jump to that conclusion because they don't think the same way that you do. There's way too many people that act like that. But in any case, it's pretty obvious to say, oh yeah, we should re-examine our own biases to make sure that they're not, leading us completely to all these sorts of conclusions. But to actually put that into action is obviously a lot harder to actually do. And I've got some further tips on that as well. But you really got to think about the who, what, where, when, why, and how of things when you're confronted with information. Where is this information coming from? What is that point of view? Do I have a similar point of view? Is that going to make me, how is that going to color how I evaluate this information? But in any case, when we re-examine our own biases, how does that protect us against people trying to exploit those knowledge gaps? It helps so that they don't use those biases against us. The way that they use our biases against us is they try to prey on our fear, our anger, our disgust, hatred, distrust, all these things that really drive a lot of political rhetoric, unfortunately, and a lot of political action. Those are those kinds of emotions that are really preyed upon. But if we re-examine our own biases, we're a lot less susceptible to those kinds of plays on our fear and anger and so forth. So, and again, that's something that you could really just go on and on and on about, but I have some other stuff I really want to get onto today, but definitely we'll talk more about that kind of stuff in future podcast episodes and on LinkedIn and stuff like that. But the next point to get to is talking about protecting against clickbait slash ragebait. Clickbait and ragebait is, it feels like it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Ragebait is, well, it's all the rage these days. And you see it in non-political contexts, like sports and video games and food as well. I mean, you look on, I think sports is particularly bad about that, was stuff like First Take, where, you know, not only is it trying to be loud and obnoxious opinions, but it's also trying to be first. We have to be first to have a take, which actually makes these takes more obnoxious and louder, so that you just try to drown out everybody else and not have a real conversation. And unfortunately, it's what a lot of people want. And so that's why the hot take machine in sports and politics and everywhere else is so lucrative, really. It gets a lot of money. Speaking of which, how do we define clickbait and ragebait? Because it's kind of one of those things that we kind of have a general view of what it is, but it's a little bit harder to really pin down the exact definition, because clickbait goes out of its way to manipulate you into clicking a story. But every story needs to bring people in to read and listen to it. And there's just so many outlets competing for our attention that they have to sometimes find some way to try to get you to pay attention to them. So we need to be more clear about what clickbait actually is. There's nothing necessarily wrong with stories trying to, or outlets trying to change like headlines and stuff to try to get you to pay attention. But there is, that only goes so far. Can only, the understanding of, okay, I see why they worded a headline like this, that can only go so far. We have to have some sort of safeguards against that kind of thing. So clickbait can be best described as sensationalized and or misleading headlines that pique your emotions. Again, that's a lot easier to define than, picking out specific examples, because some people, again, based on their biases, might find a headline misleading when it's not actually misleading. But that's try to at least find some sort of starting point for this. But clickbait really tries to use your psychology to its advantage. For example, focusing on conflict over cooperation. We're hardwired to pay attention more to conflict versus cooperation. And then, of course, you have the ethical questions about clickbait. Is it really about the actual news and about informing people, or is it really just trying to rile you up? And ragebait in particular is a type of clickbait, and it's more specifically meant to get an angry reaction out of you. It's deliberately insightful content, as in it incites you, not insightful like, oh, this has something interesting. No, it's just trying to make you mad, trying to make you pissed. Uh, it activates our negative biases towards individuals and groups that we are likely to be mad at, especially when it comes to polarizing figures. Whether I mean, one of the most obvious ones, whether you like him or not, but really presidents inherently are polarizing figures, some more than others, but Donald Trump, and I'm not saying that Donald Trump is a good or bad or so president. That's for all of you to decide. But whenever you find some sort of insightful content regarding him, whether it's for him or against him, you see a ton of Ragebait articles about that. And Ragebait's not necessarily trying to get you eh, to get mad at somebody. It might actually just be trying to get you to share it with somebody, even if you don't like it. But examples of clickbait, uh, these are particular pet peeves of mine. You see a lot of articles and video titles that say this person got owned. They got smoked in this company. And a lot of times it's like, no, somebody just disagreed with them sharply. Maybe maybe they lost the debate, but owned. Shut up. That's no. Other ones, this person said thing A, person B's so and so's response is perfect. Oh yeah, is it perfect, or do you just really agree with their response? You know, those things are kind of obvious, but people still click on them. Or my personal favorite, and by favorite I mean maybe the most annoying one, is when only specific words are capitalized. This person has a hilarious story about something. This person did something so terrible. It's just stop capitalizing random words in the titles of articles and videos. Unfortunately, that's not going to stop, but those are some ways that we see clickbait. Taking words deliberately out of context to get an emotional reaction from you, even if the overall quote was more mild or at least explanatory. And having a little bit of trouble off the top of my head thinking of a specific example of that. But, when you see short snippets of somebody's quote, especially if you see uh, a um, a short clip on the news, because the news is trying to pack a whole bunch of content in. People have really short attention spans. They want to get everything in there, so they really only play little bits a lot of times of somebody's greater quotes, or they're deliberately doing it just to get a rise out of you. You see that a lot. Blatantly subjective descriptions of objective events, uh, politically charged labels. I see a lot of ones that I see in particular is a lot of times conservative outlets like to use the term socialist, liberal outlets like to use the term fascist, and maybe in some cases those are apt descriptions, but a lot of times those are just used in a sense or in a way to demonize people. And then you see like actual in campaigns when somebody they're a warrior for these values. That's also very obnoxious too. But you see a lot of those kinds of really subjective descriptions of people to make them seem like they're the greatest things in sliced bread, or they're basically worse than the plague. But the end game of clickbait is obviously to get you to engage and to share. And you don't have to like the content. A lot of times, actually, if you hate the content, you can actually be more effective at sharing it. Because even if you hate the content, you clicking on it to get mad at the outlet making the content or the person who's sharing the content, that's just driving engagement up, and internet algorithms are just going to circulate it further and further. So sharing the content to say, look how bad or stupid or terrible this thing is. Can you believe this? What a bunch of BS. It's serving its purpose. It's trying to get you to react to it, and so it's going to generate more views, going to generate more clicks. So some tips for protecting against clickbait and ragebait. Generally speaking, just don't engage with it. Now, obviously, that's a lot easier said than done. It's not always feasible to do that. And there are some exceptions where, okay, even if it's clickbaity, you should at least pay attention to it. But just as a general rule of thumb, if you know it's being clickbaity, you can probably find somewhere else that's talking about that information that is not being so clickbaity. if you feel a knee-jerk reaction of anger to something, really a knee-jerk reaction at all, but especially of anger to something you see on the internet, take a moment before responding to something. I know, hey, I'll tell you, when I was younger, I was very reactionary to a lot of things I saw on the internet, made stupid social media posts about it. Usually better about not reacting to that stuff now. But every once in a while, I still feel like how the hell could they say that? Or I can't stand what they said. Is that really helping to actually engage with it and say how wrong it is? Probably not. So I try to be a little bit more even tempered with that, certainly publicly. Uh, some articles and videos and so on, though, are going to be so painfully obvious in how clickbaited they are that you should just not engage with them at all. If you see something that says this person was owned or this person's response to another person was perfect, I'm going to tell you right now that is a completely worthless story. You don't need to engage with it. And if it's rage bait at all, if it's purposely trying to get a rise out of you, do not engage with it at all. That just circulates it further and further, and it's still serving its purpose, because a lot of these people are not really trying to inform you. They're just trying to get a rise out of you. They're trying to exploit a knowledge gap. You didn't know that this terrible thing was happening, so they're going to try to make you get all upset about it. And then it primes you further for when another story comes out about that, especially from that outlet. And if an outlet is regularly churning out clickbait, there are some sites that just that's just all they do. And it's not, and some clickbait can at least be like somewhat quality, but there are also sites that are just nothing they put out is quality. And if they're just putting out lazy clickbait all the time, you might just want to completely disregard them in the future. The big thing is media outlets are not going to change their tactics because we respond to them, and we respond to them in a way that helps their business model. They wouldn't be doing this kind of stuff if the market wasn't basically telling them this is the kind of stuff we want. We may say we hate negativity. We may say we want better news coverage. We may want more quality content, but a lot of times our actions dictate otherwise. And it can happen to any one of us. Some people are worse about it than others, but any one of us can be, if we're not careful, we can get got, as some people would say, by clickbait and ragebait. So doing all these things is going to protect us from people trying to exploit our knowledge gaps, because it's not letting exploiters use some of their most effective tools to manipulate the public. That is to say, clickbait and ragebait. And you'll have far fewer knee-jerk reactions that exploiters are looking for to drive political action. And if they're not getting content, if they're not getting reactions out of you and they're not circulating their content, they're going to change their tactics, at least if they want to keep getting money from clicks and views. Again, obviously, much easier said than done, but something we at least need to try to strive for. Next up, a healthy dose of skepticism about political arguments. When anybody, and I pretty much mean anybody, is involved in politics, you should have a healthy dose of skepticism. The vast majority of them are trying to win a political battle. They're trying to win an election. They're trying to win passage of a legislative bill, especially if they're a legislator and it's their bill that they're pushing. Passing a ballot measure, trying to win just a simple argument on social media. But when we talk about skepticism, I want to make perfectly clear there's often a common misconception about what skepticism actually is, or at least what it should be, and at least in this context. It's not outright disbelieving something. A lot of times people just think, oh, being skeptical means, that's probably a bunch of crap. It's more that you're simply questioning it if it is valid or wanting to verify that it's true. And it may turn out that that thing or belief or whatever it is does turn out to be at least partially true. And you don't take things at face value, but at the same time, you don't necessarily just say, that's a bunch of crap. Now, at some point in time, you're going to do that, but that's why you talk about a healthy dose of skepticism, not cynicism, because that, and believe me, I have some my own issues with cynicism, including towards myself. Um, but want to be skeptical, not cynical. And sometimes that's difficult. And I know we just talked about clickbait and ragebait, which is inherently kind of cynical, but try to at least be like, need to look more into that kind of thing. We'll talk a little bit more about tips for researching political info in a little bit, but you should even have a healthy dose of skepticism towards some of the things I say. Now, I try to keep my opinions out as much as possible, but every once in a while I will, and I certainly won't put an opinion out about what I think about a particular person or a particular group or an ideology or anything like that, or an issue, or at least what side of an issue I generally fall on, or if I'm in the center of an issue. But if I do put forth an opinion about something, don't automatically make it your opinion either. Now, obviously, I would like for you to agree with my opinion. I want everybody to agree with my opinions. Most people, unless they just love the dissension, they want people to agree with them. Nothing wrong with that, but you need to be careful that you don't try to beat people over the head with your opinion. But you should especially be skeptical about those who try too hard to act like they know everything. And there's a lot of those kinds of people. And hopefully I am not one of those people. I think I do a good job about not coming across as a know-it-all. Hopefully I do. If I don't, please let me know. But there are some people that really go out of their way to tell you that they know everything about everything. And, well, they don't. But there's a lot of these people that exist in politics. Just remember, nobody has all the answers. Nobody's worldview completely explains all that goes on in the world. And that sounds obvious, but a lot of times when we find somebody who we tend to agree with, we tend to start thinking that their worldview explains a lot more than it actually does. There's just too many different cultures and histories and things going on that your worldview is just not going to completely apply to somebody else's, and somebody else's worldview is not going to completely apply to other people's worldviews. We're humans. We all have shortcomings in what we understand. We all have these knowledge gaps. So nobody should have this attitude, but unfortunately, there are a lot of people that do. But some of the tips for being healthily skeptical about political arguments is think about why somebody wants you to agree with them. Is it just because they really want to have some sort of discussion with you, or is it really they're just trying to win a political battle, so they'll say whatever they can to get you to agree with them? Whether it's to get you to vote for them or whether to get you to pressure their opponents to vote on something. Uh, don't mistake subjective arguments as objective descriptions, because there's a lot of those that go on. There's a lot of issues where people can't distinguish fact from opinion. But if something is putting a value judgment on something, it's not necessarily that the value judgment is wrong, but it's subjective. So we need to take a step back and have a little bit of skepticism about that. Every policy has pros and cons, so don't just listen to the people pushing it. Really, every policy, especially when you are talking generally very broadly about something and it has so many working parts to it, you're never going to find a perfect policy. It does not exist. I promise you. Maybe if you really get to something very, very, very specific, it can be uh it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? There could be a quote unquote perfect policy, but if you're talking about these broad strokes are debates, the hottest topics of our day, there's pros and cons to everything. Doesn't mean that it's not a good policy, but especially when you get into like actual policy analysis, at least real policy analysis, there's going to be trade-offs. It's just how it works. Somebody's going to be negatively impacted, somebody's going to be positively impacted. And unfortunately, you can't positively impact everybody, but we can try to positively impact as many people as we can, though. If your automatic reaction to, when it comes to skepticism, if your automatic reaction is to agree with a viewpoint being said, it is arguably even more imperative that you be skeptical. You probably should be more skeptical of something that you are predisposed to believe is correct than something you're predisposed to believe is wrong. Do you agree with whatever's being said because it's true, or do you agree because it panders to your viewpoint? If an argument about a policy or person sounds too simplistic, a lot of times it is, because politics is a lot more complicated than a lot of people like to make it out to be. But those with a vested interest in political victories like to boil down things to make them sound more obvious than they actually are to get people on their side. It's easier to rile people up and not make people think hard. If you talk about, well, there's a lot of nuances to this whole thing, and you try to go over everything, you're usually not going to get a rise out of people. So exploiters don't really go into that. They usually make something seem so obvious, whether it's about immigration, abortion, guns, uh, same-sex marriage, uh, transgender participation in sports. Again, not saying what I think about any of those things in particular, but they are made overly simplistic. And it's one thing that you really see, another serious pet peeve of mine, is a lot of times you hear the phrase common sense. So I usually hate whenever I hear common sense in any context, because usually common sense appeals can be just thrown out the window, because it's usually just a euphemism for this is what I believe. It's common sense because I agree with it. No, it's not common sense. Common sense does not have a political agenda. But unfortunately, a lot of the people that say something is common sense do have a political agenda. So when we have a healthy dose of skepticism, that protects us against exploiters by making it so that exploiters can't rely on a large base that readily believes whatever they say because they are on the quote-unquote same side. That's why in politics and campaigns, they talk about appealing to your base. And there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with having a base, but when they just don't hold their own side accountable, they don't try to be skeptical of anything they say, that's a problem. That makes these people ripe for being exploited by these people who are exploiting knowledge gaps. And then exploiters, if we do have this healthy dose of skepticism, exploiters have to start making more honest arguments instead of relying on buzzwords, or what people call dog whistles. So hopefully we can all start having more healthy doses of skepticism going forward, especially about people who we are predisposed to support. Tips for researching info. This is something I hopefully will dive deeper on or into when a better time comes for it, because there's a lot that can go into this. Knowing how to research it's a pretty intensive skill, and even if you know how to do it, you also have to have the time to do it. But some of the quick things to think about when researching a resource, I just talked about it earlier, but want to dive into it a little bit more now. The 5 W's and how that you might remember from grad school. Who, what, where, when, why, how. Who is putting out that information? What is that information? Where can I find that information? When did they put out that information? Why are they putting out that information? And how did they put it out? So who are the people that are promulgating that information? And what is that information they're putting out? Is it opinion based? Is it fact based? Is it fact based, but they're picking and choosing the facts that they want to put out there? Do they have any sort of financial backing? Like some studies, even if a study is not necessarily poorly done, it might be at the behest of a political group. There's a lot of studies that do that, unfortunately. Where can you find this information? So do you find it on TV? Do you find it on the internet? Is it in one of those stupid clickbait videos? When are they putting out? Is it around election time? Is it around non-election time? If it's around election time, you might, how you research it or how you take it into account might be a little bit different, because if it's around election time, it's probably trying to persuade you to think one way or another. So you need to keep that in mind. Why are they putting out that information? Are they trying to win an election? Are they really trying to inform you? Or are they trying to win some sort of other political battle? And then how? How are they getting that information? Are they doing it through a clickbait video? Are they uh, are they really trying to have a well-rounded discussion about an issue? Are they trying to give at least relatively equal footing to multiple sides of an argument? Because necessarily an argument might not be two sides. So I don't want to say both sides, all sides of an argument. So maybe there's the left, the right, the middle, maybe there's a center left, maybe there's a center right. How are they going about telling you this information? Uh, Big thing, be skeptical of fact checkers. There's a lot of things that really bug me, which might say more about me than maybe some of the stuff that actually bugs me, but I really hate the term fact checker. Lots of people fancy themselves as fact checkers, but are really just being shills for their favored people or groups, even if they're not intentionally doing so. Maybe they just haven't checked their bias at the door and they still try to put out this fact checking information. Or even if what they're doing is fact checking, but they're kind of picking and choosing what facts they're putting out in front of you. Like if we're talking about an unemployment rate, uh, depending on what the unemployment rate, if it's good or if it's bad, if it's good, and whoever the current president is, they're going to say that of course it was because of all of them. And then if the unemployment rate's bad, they're going to say, well, it was because of my predecessor, or it's because of obstinate people in Congress, for just as an example. Uh, those kinds of things are not facts. The actual unemployment rate might be a fact, but there could be more to the story. But in any case, a lot of people fancy themselves as fact checkers and they're deliberately biased, or they found their information from another biased source and just accepted it as fact instead of getting it from like a primary source, like a government statistics. Like if we talk about the unemployment rate, maybe they didn't actually go to the US Department of Labor for it. Maybe they went to a very left slanted or right slanted resource or outlet for that information. Just because somebody calls themselves a fact checker doesn't mean they count for their own bias. But you see a lot of people fancy themselves as fact checkers. I'm never going to call myself a fact checker, and if I do, you should completely, wholeheartedly reprimand me in comments and on social media if I ever call myself a fact checker. Of course, I try to be as factual as possible, and I try to give people as unbiased of information as possible. But I'm never going to use the words fact checker to describe myself. And if somebody else does, not going to say you shouldn't actually listen to them, but be a bit more skeptical of them. But another tip in researching political info, especially when it comes to your researching candidates, for example, don't leave the time for research to happen all at once. I know, especially for people who are not involved in politics for a living, you've got your own lives, you've got families, you've got hobbies that you want to do. I know I'm not saying that you should be paying attention to politics 24/7. In fact, it's good that some people are not being ingrained in politics 24/7. But especially if you're researching candidates or you're researching issues, don't leave all your time for research to happen all at once, which is to say right around election time. Or at least not just for a day or two. At least try to spread it out a little bit. There's too much info to have to research all at once, so you want to spread it out. And that's partly why you see what we call ballot drop off. So if you have a whole bunch of elections on a single ballot, you have president, you have US Senate, you have US House, you have governor, you have state house, state Senate, local courts, ballot measures, local mayors, maybe city council, local bonds, a whole bunch of other stuff. There's a lot of stuff you've got to a lot of ballots. There's a lot of things that people have to research, and if you leave it all for the very end, you're not going to want to research it all, or your eyes are going to glaze over. Or you're just going to run out of steam, and you might rely on people who try to exploit you by trying to make things sound simpler than they actually are, trying to activate your biases. So you really don't want to have everything set out all at once, let alone whether you know where to go find this information. But one big thing I would suggest is to set aside important political info in a spreadsheet or a document or whatever works for you to return to later when it comes to election time, or if some sort of big political debate is happening. Uh, Now, what is considered important to you is going to depend a lot on what you care about. So there's no real easy answer for determining what is important, but you want to try to keep like a running log of that information. Because long-term memory on political info is faulty, especially if you aren't a regular consumer of politics. And even for the regular consumers of politics, long-term uh, memory is going to be faulty because human minds can only contain so much information. And we've got all this other stuff that we're trying to pay attention to, especially with all the stimuli that are attacking our brains all at once. And this also helps with these heuristics that we use, these mental shortcuts that we all use when we vote. Some people, they just rely on the party ID, uh, or whatever buzzwords that these people use to try to say, hey, vote for me because I'm a conservative warrior, I'm a liberal warrior, I'm a champion of truth, or whatever nonsense they use to sell themselves. Uh, Also, knowing where quality, unbiased information can be found is absolutely critical. That sounds obvious, but a lot of times we either don't know where to find it or we go towards something we trust because it is something that caters to our point of view. So again, need to be careful about where our biases lead us. Uh, Now, what quality and unbiased information you're going to need is partly going to depend on the kind of information you're looking for. But some of the big examples to use is I'm always going to vouch for them, not just because I used to work for them, but Ballotpedia, the Encyclopedia of American Politics. They have tons of info about the elections that are going on in your area. They have a sample ballot tool that you can use so you know what is going to be on your ballot. Yeah, you have a local election administrator that's going to send you a sample ballot, but Ballotpedia can also send you a sample ballot and also has links to those candidates and those issues on their website or to other places that you can find that information that you're looking for. Bill tracking databases, that's a little bit more or a lot more intensive, but some of those bill tracking databases will have uh, uh, summaries of the information that you're looking for. There's civics oriented groups, particularly the ones that don't get heavily involved in campaigns, because there's a lot of civics oriented groups that are quote unquote nonpartisan, and it's technically true, but they tend to lean one way or another. So ones that don't have so much of a vested interest in what exactly happens or who exactly wins, they're a little bit more, I would say those are a bit more reliable to go to for information. Obviously, I'm going to vouch for myself. I like to hopefully think that I'm a good resource for information, so I try to be as much as I can. And then there's just general bipartisan organizations like, again, this is a more intensive one, but Bipartisan Policy Center. They get really into the weeds of information. And there's also just organizations that serve uh, specific government bodies, but in a national context, like the National Conference of State Legislatures has a ton of info all relating to state legislatures. So just as a few examples. Now, I want to make clear that this does not mean that more biased places can't have quality information. They can. But know what you could be getting into if you rely on them too much. Because they might be telling you, oh, hey, these are some of the things that are going on. This is what some of the candidates have said about whatever issue is going on. But if you rely on them too much, they might try to sway your opinion to say, so therefore you should vote for this person or you shouldn't vote for this person. And maybe they're right. Maybe you should or shouldn't vote for that person. But just remember, they got their own biases. So you need to really be careful how much you rely on them. And then so these knowing how to research info, and again, I hopefully can go much more in depth on this kind of topic, but protects us against exploiters by making it so that exploiters can't abuse our ignorance about various political topics. Again, all of us are ignorant about something in politics to some extent because there's just too much stuff to pay attention to. There's just at the federal level alone. What is Donald Trump doing? Okay, what is Congress doing? What is the Supreme Court doing? What are the federal agencies under the purview of the presidency doing? Okay, great. Now, what is going on in your state government? What is your governor doing? What is your state legislature doing? What are your state courts doing? Then you get to the local level. What are your local governments doing? And it can be very hard to find information on them. And then more unique governments like special districts, like a water district, a fire district, all sorts of things to have to pay attention to. And then you've got the non-political stuff going on. You've got your job that you got to focus on. How are you going to take care of your families when you blow off steam? Because you don't want to just work and pay attention to politics all the time. Go to sporting events, hang out with your friends at the bar or whatever. All sorts of things that you have to be paying attention to that are political and non-political. So things to try to triage. I know you have to kind of triage what information is coming into your head, but at least these few tips about researching political info can make you more confident in the info that you are getting, that it is quality, that it is unbiased, or at least if it is biased, you know what the bias is and where it's coming from. Ultimately, though, to end off things, to really blunt the impact that exploiters of knowledge gaps can have over us, is quite simply to disagree better. We're not going to agree on everything, obviously. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that has become an existential issue where they encounter people that don't agree with them and they think it's a personal affront to their existence. And it's not. One of the things I want to highlight is I'll link it in the episode, is there was an article in Governing Magazine. It was about governors Michelle Lujan Grisham and Spencer Cox. Grisham is the governor of New Mexico, and Cox is the governor of Utah. Former is Democrat, the latter is Republican. So two governors, one from each major party, talking about the importance of working together and hearing others out and just generally being bipartisan. And several of the highlights from the article I want to highlight from both of them is Governor Grisham said people from opposing parties can disagree with each other without being disagreeable. Governor Spencer Cox, to quote the actual article, also stressed there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach to the 50 states, which he described as laboratories of democracy. States differ greatly from each other, he said, but added governors can learn from each other regardless of their political affiliation. See, there, nobody has all the answers, and somebody who has a generally different opinion than you might have a good idea because there just might be something that you just didn't consider. And then both governors pointed out that political party identification was once far lower on the list of the ways people identify themselves, if at all. That was something I had just mentioned towards the very beginning of this episode, you might remember, basically about how your political party should not be tied up too much into your identity. Yeah, it's going to be some part of your identity to some extent, and there's nothing inherently wrong with being of a political party or not being a political party. But when that becomes too much of your personality and your who you are, and that's basically how you lead off with people, like to the point where, like, if you're a Republican, I'm not going to interact with you. If you're a Democrat, hit the road. If you're an independent, screw you. You're not even going to take a side. You need to take a side. None of those are helpful. We should be able to interact with people from all walks of life, from all different kinds of political views. Do not fight polarized opinion with more polarized opinion. It's almost like the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, hate cannot, uh, trying to remember the exact wording, but hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that, I think is the exact quote. So if you're thinking fight fire with fire, this person's being a jerkwad, I'm going to also be a jerkwad to them. That's not helping anything, and you're also just further opening the door for these exploiters to take advantage of you by exploiting these knowledge gaps, because we don't have all the answers. And the people we agree with do not have all the answers, no matter how much they want to act like they do. But some of the organizations I'll highlight, and I've got a couple of their websites open to try to describe a little bit more about them. But these are some of the organizations that are dedicated specifically to improving our political dialogue. There's the Builders Movement, which has some couple of studies I've referenced in works before. But the mission and the approach, they say our mission is to equip citizens to overcome toxic polarization and solve our toughest problems together. No matter what your viewpoint is, we cannot solve the biggest issues we face if we're just drowning out other people's opinion. That has never actually solved anything. American history is riddled with examples of how that did not actually work out for us, did not make things better for all the segments of American culture. Another one is the Conflict Information Consortium, and I believe it's at the University of Colorado. Yes, directed by, I'm not sure if it's Guy or Guy, and Heidi Burgess. It was founded in 1988. It's a multidisciplinary center for research and teaching about conflict and its transformation. And it was named the Conflict Resolution Consortium initially, but they changed the name when we started focusing on intractable conflicts, which are seldom resolved. But they focus on basically how to deal with long-standing debates, or not even debates, but arguments and strife. And then there's also Braver Angels, who say, and our vision, we envision an America with respectful embrace of political disagreements, where civic friendship flourishes and competing perspectives strengthen our nation. Embracing values of respect, humility, honesty, and responsible citizenship, our goal is not to change people's views of issues, but to change their views of each other. Now, I know a lot of that can all sound super flowery and like, oh yeah, okay, I'm sure that's a doable thing, but it those kinds of things really are, and they are things that we should be striving for. We should be striving to disagree better. We don't have to agree on everything, but we don't know all the answers. Somebody might have even if they don't have a better answer overall, quote unquote, they might have something useful for us to learn from and to take answers from, like what Governors Grisham and Cox were talking about in that governing article. So how does, and also not to, really don't like sounding like I'm selling myself, but I sometimes highlight it in the show notes, is I have a short educational email course about depolarizing politics, and basically about how some of the mistakes made when we try to depolarize politics actually make politics worse. And I'll give a little bit of a taste of it. One thing I talk about is how if you overly focus on how much we're polarized and you highlight that in discussion, that can ironically actually enhance polarization, if specifically affective polarization, how we feel about each other. Talk about Braver Angels, or talk about trying to change how we view each other, not how we view the issues. So you have to find this right balance of, yeah, we need to talk about polarization, but if we overstate it too much, people are going to react and say, "Oh, wow, that side is that polarized. I'm going to react accordingly." Or the study that I cited in there said people they temper their views on issues, but their affective polarization increases. That is, their opinion about the other side tanks. They don't want to seem like they're too far to the side, so they kind of become a little bit more in the middle, but they increase their dislike of the opposition. And another study I cited in that part of the educational email course talked about how if specifically if journalists put a polarizing content warning, which basically tells people, hey, talking about polarization can unintentionally increase affective polarization, that actually can help blunt that impact. So if people get that warning about, hey, reading about polarization can increase affective polarization specifically, some people might say, okay, maybe I need to cool it and not be so negatively opinionated about the other side. That's the basic gist of it. So my educational email course, it's technically actually 6 emails, but there's an introductory email, and then there's 5 days that cover ways that we can help depolarize the political climate, or the 5 big mistakes made in trying to depolarize the political climate, why we make those mistakes, and how we can improve and fix those mistakes. So that is another resource for you to use in regards to disagreeing better, because it really directly tackles this polarization issue. Now, enough of tooting my own horn. How does disagreeing better relate to this overall concept of people exploiting knowledge gaps for their political gain? Exploiters use our differences for their own gain, and they set us off against each other. So we start to not disagree better. We start to get very vehement in our disagreements. And they make it sound like we want completely divergent goals, which is not true. We all generally want the same things. We want this nation to be prosperous. We want to take care of our families. We want to live our lives in freedom. We want to be able to express ourselves. All these kinds of things. These certain values, these basic values of what many people would consider what it means to be an American. Most of us share those views. We just have different ideas how to get there. I'm going to be a little bit nerdy here, and I'm going to quote the Fallout TV show, because I'm a huge Fallout fan. Played a lot of the games. Uh, but basically, the character Maximus says everyone wants to save the world. They just disagree on how. And that series in general is always got really great. Both the TV show and the games have really great commentary about human nature in general. But enough being nerdy about that for now. But if we want to learn how to disagree more effectively and usefully, or if we learn how to do that, we will see great results. We will feel much more heard by other people. It'd be better for our mental health, both individually and collectively. Uh, we're more likely to see some of our ideas get implemented instead of have them be temporarily instituted and then completely reversed by somebody else when a new administration comes in, and see a lot less of this strife that we see all too often in today's political climate. And again, I know a lot of that sounds very flowery and sounds like, okay, yeah, sure, that's going to happen. It really can, but we need to all start taking a good long look in the mirror, including myself, and really think about, okay, how have we contributed to the problem? How can we all get better? Because that's something that all of us can do. So hopefully these are very worthwhile, actionable tips for you to act on, so that we can all be a lot less exploitable when it comes to people trying to exploit our knowledge gaps in politics. But that is going to do it for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. anywhere you get the podcast right now. That's just YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Maybe in the future, if you watch this episode, it'll be on more stuff. But please like, comment, and subscribe to help, and share to help the channel grow. And anybody in your networks, we really appreciate it. But other stuff in the show notes is my Facebook, my LinkedIn, that educational email course I talked about a little bit ago, or just a few minutes ago. That's in there. My Medium accounts where I talk about various political science topics from time to time whenever I have the time. I've finally gotten back on this series that I'm close to finishing about the longest partisan losing streaks, these longest partisan droughts for both Republicans and Democrats. Basically, in which of these places have Democrats and Republicans, for which of these races have they gone the longest without winning? So I look at governorships, winning states for the presidency, and several other offices as well. So that's something I'm working on there right now. And obviously, I promote this podcast as well, and a couple of other things in the show notes as well. So in any case, that is going to do it for today. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take care.